So today we're going to be talking about two-step inequalities. So we're going to actually be solving some inequalities today. The main thing with inequalities that you got to remember is that they're actually representing a range of numbers, right? So we're not just saying like x equals 2. We're saying x is equal to every number that's above 2 or something like that. So it's a lot of different numbers, right? But solving inequalities are going to be pretty much the exact same as with the equations, with one big exception. And that is, and we're going to call this a big warning right here. So warning, anytime this happens, it's going to involve something. So anytime you multiply or divide by a negative number, the inequality sign flips. Okay, so again, anytime you multiply or divide by a negative number, you got to flip the inequality sign. There's an example of that happening at the top of your page right here. Notice how they're dividing by a -1. Okay, the -5 on this side doesn't matter. It's this -1 that's going to both sides. When you do that, when you have something dividing to each side that's negative, notice how the inequality sign flipped around. It's eating the other direction. Okay? So that's the one thing you got to look out for when you're solving it. And then when you're graphing, writing, interval notation, that's going to be the same as what we talked about last time. But again, just a reminder, the alligator always eats the biggest number. So here it's saying h is bigger than 5 because it's eating the h, right? So that means when you did your open circle, because it's a regular inequality symbol, when you did your open circle, your arrow should be going to the right, to all the numbers that are bigger than 5. Because that's what h is. This is representing h, right? So, and then when you do your interval notation, since you used an open circle, you use a parenthesis, right? That means it doesn't quite equal 5, but it gets close enough that we just say 5. And then comma infinity, and infinities will always have a parenthesis because you can never equal infinity. Okay, so let's look through a couple of examples. So let's start with number 1 here. So this is just a two-step inequality, right? I've got a best friend and acquaintance. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this +3. So it's adding, so I would subtract 3 to each side. That gives me -8g is greater than 8. Then, to get the g by itself, I've got to divide by a -8 to each side. Now I'm dividing by a -8, so warning, I am dividing by a negative number. That means that this inequality sign has to flip around. So g is now going to be less than -1. Okay, that's my solved inequality. That's one of my answers. Now I'm going to draw my number line. So we actually have to draw number lines today. I know it's the worst thing in the world. How dare we make you draw number lines, right? It's so tough. I usually just draw 3 numbers, so it's really hard. Okay, then I'm going to look at my inequality sign. Again, if we have the regular inequalities, that's an open circle. If we have the greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, you got the closed circles. Okay, and these, when you're doing interval notation, would be parentheses, and these would be the square brackets. So looking at the graph, it's going to be on -1, and it's a regular inequality, so it's going to be an open circle. Okay, then I'm looking at which number is bigger. Is it the variable or the number? So the way I always tell my students to do this is if the alligator eats the number, your arrow is going to go to the left. If the alligator eats the variable, it goes to the right. So this is eating the number, which means the number is bigger, which means that my variable is representing everything less, so it's going to go to the left. Okay, so that would be my number line. And then to do the interval notation, it's always the least number, greatest number in your interval, right? The least number in this interval, if it goes to the left, it keeps going on forever in the negative direction. which would be negative infinity. And I'm just going to write INF because that's what you're going to have to put in your Canvas quiz. And you can never equal infinity, so it's going to have a parenthesis. And then we do comma, and then our greatest number in this interval. The greatest number is going to be -1. But it doesn't quite equal -1, right? Because you've got that open circle. So open circle means I'm going to put a parenthesis next to that as well. And that would be my interval notation. So that would be your answers. Okay? Again, this part's pretty much the same as your equations, other than you have to watch out for the negative infinity. This stuff is kind of the new stuff, right, with inequalities. Again, it's not super complicated, though, because if it's a regular inequality circle, it's an open circle, and then you just pay attention to what the alligator's eating. If the alligator's eating the number, it goes to the left. If the alligator's eating the variable, it goes to the right. And then interval notations is the least number in that interval and greatest number. So there's only two numbers here. And hint, this unit, it's going to be, one of those numbers always is going to be one of the infinities, either negative infinity or positive infinity. And then the other number is going to be whatever you solved for. And that's pretty much it. And then the question is whether it would have a bracket or parentheses on that number. The infinity will always have a parenthesis. Okay, let's do one more, just to make sure we got it. Let's do one of these on the back here. I'll do 17. So 17, let's look at this one. So I have z over 8 plus 3. Again, two-step equation. I'm going to start by minusing 3 to each side. That gives me z over 8 is greater than negative 27. And then I've got to get rid of this 8. So I'd multiply each side by 8. Now I'm multiplying each side by 8. Would I flip the sign? Is that a negative number? No, it's not. So just because I'm multiplying this number, it doesn't really matter. It's this number that's going to both sides that tells me if I flip the sign. This 8 is positive, so the sign is going to stay the same direction. You're going to have z is greater than whatever negative 27 times 8 is, which is negative 216. Okay, so there's my solved inequality. Now the next step is to do our little number line here. So again, I usually just do 3 numbers: the main number, the number before it, and the number after it. Okay. Now looking at this symbol, is it a regular symbol, inequality symbol, or is it a equal to? So it doesn't have that line underneath of it, so instead of a closed circle, I'm going to use an open circle again. Okay. And then if we look at it, the alligator's eating the variable. That means the variable represents all these numbers that are bigger than negative 216, which the direction that has bigger numbers would be to the right. So we're going to have our arrow going to the right. Because again, this arrow is representing all the numbers that our variable is representing. That's what we're graphing. So there's our graph, and then to do our interval notation, it's least number, greatest number. So the least number here would be negative 216, right? That's the least number in that inequality. And then the greatest number would be going on forever in the positive direction, would be positive infinity. So INF. Now infinity always has a parenthesis. This has an open circle next to it, the negative 216, so it's also going to have a parenthesis. Okay. Just to kind of show you guys what it would look like with a square, with a equal to. So this would be, I'm just going to do this real quick. So minus 5 is 7, greater than or equal to negative 4. So this is a fraction. Okay, so b would equal, well, actually flip signs because it's divided by negative. So 7 over 4 negative is less than or equal to b. So to do the interval notation on this one, again, the graph, and I'm just doing this quick, so I'm just going to do one, negative 7 over 4, would have a closed circle on it. B, it's eating the b, so that means b is bigger than negative 7 over 4, so it's going to go to the right. And then the interval notation would be negative 7 over 4 would be the least number. Greatest would be infinity. Infinity would have a parenthesis. Now, since this has a closed number, it would have that square bracket next to it. That square bracket means that it includes that number. That's what that equal sign means. This means it's all those numbers that are bigger than it. So like negative 216.01, actually be negative 215.9 something, but anyway, you get the idea. So whatever would be really close to it, but greater, would be part of it. But negative 216 is not necessarily part of it. Okay, so that square bracket shows that it does include that number. Parenthesis means it gets really close, but doesn't quite equal it. Okay, all right. If you have any questions, concerns, ask your teachers. We're here to help.